Thank you, David. We're going to have a very quick presentation. We're going to get right into the questions. We have about an hour, so we're going to have about a 50-minute session, and then in the last 10 minutes we're going to open it up for Q&A. The topic today, as we talked about, is Cambridge, the new 24/7 hub. The idea here is, as you'll see when we get into it, is really focusing on more of the greater Kendall Square area. When you think about Harvard Square and Central Square, those areas have been, continue to be more of a 24/7 hub. But over the last 10 or 15 years, we've really seen a burst of development activity in the greater Kendall Square area, which has turned that sub-market into much more of a vibrant 24/7 location. So Cambridge has always been an innovative area. At the turn of the last century, it was much more of an industrial support location for Boston. And so when you look at some of the old aerials and you think about some of the old companies that were there, they were much more industrial in nature. That being said, there was a fair amount of innovation that happened in that area, starting with the long-distance phone call. The first long-distance phone call was actually from Cambridge to Boston, so whether or not it's really long distance or not, I guess it's a bit debatable, but the fact that it happened right near the MIT campus is relevant. Also, many of the railroad innovations that happened, and many of the things that have shaped the landscape of our country, color television, color movies, a lot of that innovation, obviously Polaroid, happened in Kendall Square. So when we think about the innovation that has happened there in the last 20 or 30 years, it's really been the last 100 or 125 years. So it's just a consistent theme of smart people innovating in that sub-market. When you think about the 60s to the 80s, obviously Polaroid was a big user of space in Kendall Square. And once again, these stats are greater Kendall Square, so we're including the MIT University Park area, a bit of Kendall Square, and then the bulk of it is actually right around Kendall Square T-Stop. And so when you think about that market at that point, it was, including everything under construction, in 1985 was 7 million square feet. And in 1960 it was 1.5 million square feet. You can see in a second when you look at some of the aerials, and it might be a bit hard to see, it was a very industrial area up until the mid-80s when Cambridge Center broke ground. And so a couple of interesting stats here, and these aren't necessarily meant to compare to each other, but if you just look at the columns, you've got 5.8 million square feet of existing commercial space in 1985, 260 housing units, which you'll see in a second is amazing the growth we've seen in that sector. 3 restaurants. Now, restaurants we're characterizing as table service restaurants. So whether it's a coffee shop or a secret type of establishment, there was 3 in this whole sub-market, which is a pretty astounding fact. So obviously not a 24/7 hub in 1985. And then the hotel keys is a little over 1,000. You go to 2000, so a 15-year span. The commercial space, 12 million square feet, 838 units, 11 restaurants, which still, when you think about the size of that market, is very underserved. And almost 2,000 hotel keys. So the next one is the real interesting burst of activity. So in the 10 years over the 2000s, you saw the housing stock go up to 2,700 units, the commercial space 16.3 million square feet, and the restaurants started to come in. Still probably not enough, with 2026, but obviously a step in the right direction. And then you look at where we are today. You've got 3,000 housing units, almost 19 million square feet with a bunch of significant amount of space under construction, 47 restaurants. So those of you that have spent some time in Cambridge over the years, really, when you go over there now, it's a completely different landscape, a completely different feel, and really is working towards that 24/7 location. And so what we're going to get into today is try to really analyze what's driving that, and then what's the future of that submarket. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel. Steve Marsh, who's the managing director of McCall, MIT's real estate arm. Current projects include Osborne Triangle and Kendall Square.
Couple quick comments.
Sure.
This is a slide showing a couple activities that we have going today. If you look at the left of the slide, we are involved in creating some space for Pfizer at 610 Main Street. We have leased some land adjacent to that. In the middle of that shot on the left to Novartis, which Jerry will talk about his development activities there. And then off to the right, we have a joint venture with Forest City. Frank Weiss is here today as a partner, trying to develop some innovation space there. So MIT is, again, we're an institute based on creating and disseminating knowledge, and part of it is trying to create a collaborative environment around the institute. So these activities directly support that. We've just recently finished a process where we've rezoned Kendall Square to add 1.3 million square feet of new space, mixed use, some housing, retail, and continuing on the innovation theme, some additional innovation space for both the commercial collaborators and the institute itself. So,
thank you. Next we have Jerry Nadeau from he's the Global Head of Facilities and Operations at Novartis. And his current project is the large expansion on Mass Ave.
So, you've probably most of you in the audience have seen these pictures from the war times, and I've seen more times than I ever met. But this is the two buildings on Mass Ave, the Shikamori and the Myelin buildings. My involvement in these are limited. This falls more under Brian Lynch's realm as the global head of campuses. But I will inherit them once we get to operating them on a day-to-day basis, which should be some point mid-2015. Obviously, I've only been with the company for a little over 5 months now, but this is an exciting undertaking for us. The thing that's interesting when I talk to my counterparts around the world at our other sites is that Cambridge is the one area we don't have a campus. It's an urban campus. We depend on a lot of you in the audience, the real estate side of things, to try to maintain as much of a campus feel as we can without actually having one. Majority of my career has been with Biogen. My whole career has been in the Kendall Square, Central Square area, so I feel like I'm pretty familiar with the landscape. But it's where we want to be. It's where Novartis wants to be. It's where Biogen wanted to be. Obviously, they felt strongly enough about it to welcome us and we come back. But it's it's an exciting area. It's easier for us to recruit in the Cambridge market more probably than any other site globally. As our headquarters for research and development, we find that we're taking on a lot of when we change things around the globe. Research keeps coming back to Cambridge, so I don't see the growth stopping anytime soon. Fortunately, on the planning side, because it's such an active market and we're able to recruit so easily, it really puts a squeeze on me on the planning side to get space up quick enough and try to have some symmetry to it.
Pinch hitting for a underweather air shuffle. We've got Rob Hickey, who's a partner at Leggat McCall Properties, currently one of the largest development projects underway with the Middlesex Courthouse.
So what we have on the slide here is our plan for the redevelopment of the East Cambridge Courthouse, the Sullivan Courthouse. This is a project we put under agreement with DCAM back in December of 2012. And we've been working through a planning effort and permitting effort on that project. We've been in front of the planning board now once. We've been back before the planning board on February 18th, and are hoping to have that project fully entitled by the spring when our current tenant, the jail, is to be relocated, and then we're going to start construction this summer for a 2-year redevelopment of that asset. That project will be completely transformed to a modern office building in the tower portion. The podium level is going to have 24 residential units. The base is going to be entirely a new retail area that is going to generate activity not only for the building but for the neighborhood and serve as an amenity to the neighborhood. And we're also proposing to add a grocery store at the east end of the city-owned garage, facing First Street, in a space that, if any of you are familiar with it, is mostly vacant today. This is a project that we think is an extension of all of the activity that's going on in Kendall Square. There's been very, very little office activity on the spec front in the last 12 to 13 years. Really, since 2001, there's been no spec development in Cambridge. And on the office front, there really has not been the economics to justify it. The boom has been almost entirely on the life sciences side up until recently. So we're very, very excited about this development opportunity. It's something we've been committed to for the last year and a half, and we will continue to forge ahead.
And finally, we have Alex Twining, who's the President and CEO of Twining Properties. Current projects include Cambridge Landing and Watermark Kendall.
That's the wrong slide. So we basically focus on urban mixed-use development and transit nodes, so that's why we're in Kendall Square and also Central Square. And this is a project that we began back in 2003. We bought just off the left side of the page is our first phase of apartment tower where we built 321 apartments, and that opened in 2007. And then right next to it is our second phase, which is another 121 units. We have 465 altogether. Also, as part of this, we built all the public infrastructure, which is all the parks, and built a waterfront walkway out to through the canal and the canoe and kayak landing. We also, when we founded retail, as you mentioned, there weren't many restaurants a decade plus ago, and people told us no restaurants will ever come to Kendall Square because Paul Carey died 20 years ago. So we said that doesn't make sense in other parts of the planet, even Dallas and Houston. If there are 11 million square feet of office, you should get restaurants. So we gave up on all the advisors in the local Boston. We picked some guys that had never done any retail, sent them out, and long story short, they began to bring a lot of restaurants. We now have 5 in both the buildings, and they've also been helping out Alexandria and MIT and Biomed and a lot of others in the area to bring some more life to this part of town. So we think Kendall Square is gradually changing quite a bit, which is great, and we're now also doing a project that the next red line stops Central Square, a much more complicated location, as Steve knows from University Park. We hope to get through it faster than you did, which was, what, 20 years? I can't remember. And that project will have actually office, hotel, apartments, and a lot of retail. The problem here, of course, was there was no retail, no housing down there. There's a lot of retail, and so how do we fit into Central Square and still keep all the people happy? That's the ultimate challenge, and the city's been going through a rezoning process for about 5 years, so we're hoping to see that come to life. It's an amazing opportunity to totally change Central Square in a positive way. That'll bring it back to the state of the 1920s and 30s.
Thank you very much. Our first question is one that I think is pretty interesting and interesting to get everyone's opinion on. And that is, how much of the development boom that we've seen is related to the Cambridge Tech Cluster, and how much of it is related to the urbanization trend that we've seen really in all parts of the country? And Steve, do you know about that?
I think Cambridge is both, frankly. I think it probably started more in the Kendall Square area as innovation-driven. There was a lot of research activity as a base anchor in there, and I think between MIT and Harvard and the activities going on in the Cambridge market have drawn a lot of people interested in leveraging off of that innovation space. So something like at MIT, there's a patent-granted 4 days out of every 5 days of the week. So that type of activity is generating an interest in terms of how people are going to develop products and get new services out to help mankind, from everything from life science, healthcare, to energy, a variety of other activities. So that, I think, is probably the principal driver. I think urbanization has clearly been a trend in the last, certainly last 10 or probably 20 years, and that, I think, is taking a toll in Kendall as well, as the city's trying to get the right type of balance in mixed-use activity. Workers want to be closer to what's going on where they're working and have a much more vibrant environment. So I think you're seeing those two forces hit head-on in Kendall Square, which I think is a great dynamic.
And Alex, for you, as far as the growth and the demand for residential units, how much of it is tied to employees of Cambridge-based companies, and how much of it is an urbanization trend?
I'd say actually it could be half to local business, but then there's also a local university, which I guess you call it business, which is not. There's a huge number of people that are associated with MIT, whether they're faculty, staff, students. And I think there's something else also going on, which is what we found when we really dug into it 10 years ago. A lot of people going to MIT, if they wanted to live in an apartment, would go to the Devonshire or Back Bay, because there was not much to pick from around them in terms of new housing product. So that's sort of a third piece that's occurred also.
But there's no one specific thing. I guess it's all those trends together colliding. And then the fourth thing is, once the critical mass of housing is grown, it's feeding on itself, and that's what's driving the restaurants and more activity. That's making it a desirable location in its own right to come to, which it certainly wasn't a decade ago.
And Jerry, on a related note, Novartis' employees, how do they get to work? Do they live in Cambridge? Do they come in from the suburbs? Obviously, with as many employees as you have, they probably a little bit of everything, but are you seeing any trends in that?
I think it's like I said, I think it's a little bit of everything. I mean, obviously, Cambridge is very, it's about to push the use of public transportation as much as possible. I think we do as a company too. I mean, one project that they finished over the summer was a bike cage. And, something as simple as where to park your bike is so important to such a big majority of our staff. I mean, this is probably about the most sophisticated, nicest bike collectionary I've ever seen. Yeah, they still find a way to complain about it. So I think it's a mix, Steve. But I know, one of the other things that we noticed, like the closing of the Longfellow Bridge and things like that. I know it affects me personally. For 20 years, it's been my commute. Like, okay, now I need to change. And even moving between the different companies, it's like every time I move, it's like, okay, what's the new route to work? I mean, Cambridge is so different. You just go over 3-4 blocks, and it's a complete different commute, different way to live.
Yeah, I can give you a stat in reverse, which is for the people who live in our apartment buildings. Your zoning required one space per apartment unit. In actuality, only about half of the people have a car down there. So that says something. If they're probably means they're walking or taking the bike or the subway to work.
And I think the other side of that is that the data bears out that less than half of the people in most locations in Cambridge are relying on cars. So on the commercial side, there's, I know at Tech Square Garage and the Draper Garage there, the demand for parking at one point was too much, and now there's excess parking. So it has proven out that people are much less reliant on the car, and I think that's more true of Cambridge really than any part of this region.
I want to go back to something that's near and dear to my heart on a daily basis, the Longfellow Bridge. And so it's a 3-year, give or take, effect on the market. That coupled with traffic, Rob, do you see any impacts on demand where tenants are going to be focused on other submarkets where they don't have to deal with that?
Well, I think there's, right now there's clearly, if you look at the Easy Ride shuttle that he's taking lockdown in Leggat Circle, there's clearly a logjam's being created at Leggat Circle because of the bridge closure. Whether there are major tenants that leave Cambridge because of it, we haven't seen that yet, and I somehow doubt we will. I think you may see people that move out because of overall congestion. I don't see that move being made from Cambridge to the seaport, for example, because I think the seaport has its own set of issues. So I think my sense is that it's more people moving out for price reasons and congestion reasons, but not moving within the urban environment for that reason. But it's a little bit early to tell the answer to that.
As every new building gets delivered, the traffic gets a little bit worse.
Yeah.
Steve, do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I have to say that the Longfellow Bridge shutdown has certainly not been a convenience to any of us. You combine that with Callahan being shut down and then the shuttle laying off the top of the bridge and a few other things. It's no wonder that there's a little bit of gridlock in the city here. I think in the long run, all those are temporary. We're going to improve those things. The infrastructure will be back in place. So I think we can slug through that. We slug through the big dig. This is much smaller and shorter duration, so we'll get through it. But it does demonstrate, the need that for infrastructure to support the economic growth we have here. This is an area in the country where we're fortunate enough to actually have some economic growth. There's a whole lot of places in the globe and even across the United States that aren't experiencing this. So I think we want to make sure that we're taking care of that, making sure that we're, building the infrastructure in the long run to support it.
Subway's still running fine across the bridge. So.
Right. Agreed. Right. On a related note, missing opportunities. Is Harvard Square and Harvard University missing an opportunity? It seems like they've been relatively stagnant in their development for third-party tenants over the last 20 years, and the development they've had seems to be more academic in nature. Give us your perspective on what they've done in the future of Harvard Square.
Yeah, I would say that, Harvard and MIT have had two very different environmental surroundings. If you think about it, Harvard was in a residential district, a historic residential district of Cambridge. They haven't had the opportunity to expand around their university as much as MIT is. MIT's been fortunate where they're in a former industrial zone, so we've had the last 30 years to go out and sort of facilitate a change around the environment. Harvard has invested in Alston, and I think there's all sorts of hopes for what goes on at Alston. I think today, what's currently on the drawing board looks mostly academic. We hope that they actually think about business development in the long run. For the area, we hate it from a competitive perspective in Kendall when people bring up some additional supply, but I think in the long term for Massachusetts to have innovation-based activity happening is good for all of us, and I think Harvard will eventually do more of that, through their means of their real estate.
Now, do you see any residential third-party development happening in Harvard Square? Is the land cost too prohibitive?
Well, I think as Steve said, there's almost no land, period. Full stop. I mean, you can throw a stone at a few spots that are located. I mean, and again, because Kendall is an industrial. And even if you look at Central Square, you look on the map, the residents come right up to 1 block from the prime commercial core. Kendall Square, they're way out from it because there wasn't enough area. Harvard Square, they're right there at Harvard Square, so there's not much room to do anything.
So Rob, as the last minute substitute, here's your softball question of the morning. Where's the next area that you see for development in the Cambridge market?
Well, I mean, I did some work on the properties that Alex acquired, the Quest properties in Central Square. So I think Central Square is a very interesting area. And I think the planning around that is promoting, more density, but more density around residential. So I think that's a very interesting area. I think the area north of Kendall Square, where we made a big bet, is a very interesting area. You've got all the improvements along Binney Street. You've got that Alexandria is making a connection to their projects. You've got a new 2-acre park there. You've got the completion of 152nd Street. You've got Invesco investing in 2 First Street, and you've got North Park getting going, and you've got education building getting built. So I think as you move north of Kendall Square, I think that area is where there's going to be a lot of growth. I also think the ultimate extension of the Green Line and the fulfillment of that promise is going to be very important to making not only the Red Line key to Cambridge, but also the Green Line being a key route.
And how do you see the Seaport's future? The Seaport's been a relief valve.
Actually, just 2 other things. I think within Kendall, there are 2 big spots. Number one, the DOT site. We still have a suburban office campus there. There's a massive amount of land. That's a huge development site potential.
Gosh, I thought we agreed not to talk about that.
And the second spot is North Point, which is happening, and there's a lot more to go there. And the Green Line will help it immensely.
So, specifically North Point, what's the future of Seaport? Seaport has been, other than the large vertex deal, has been a lot of tech companies that have located there for cost alternative to urban location. And now that we're all looking at new construction and the pricing associated with that, what is the future of Seaport, both residentially and commercial? Maybe Alex, you can jump on that first.
Sure. I think what's very interesting about Seaport is that the main area that we worked on is Seaport Square, and which Boston Global Investing has been overseeing with Morgan Stanley. And that particular site, I call it the hole in the donut. You sort of got fan piers, really pretty developed now. You've got everything out towards all the Fidelity properties that happen, and you've got the old Port Point Channel. But if you look at it, there were 25 acres of parking lots sitting in the middle of all that. As that starts to fill in, it's going to connect all those other neighborhoods, and all of a sudden the entire area is going to become a lot more active. Most importantly, too, aside from the new apartment building we're building, sort of in the middle of Seaport Square, there are 2 new office buildings at Skanska's building. That's 1 million square feet, and with that comes a huge new park right on Seaport Boulevard. So in the next couple of years, you're going to see a huge amount of change there. That said, in terms of is it the next Cambridge, Kendall Square, I'd say no. I mean, there's no MIT there, okay? MIT drives Kendall Square, and so, but it is a viable location. It's a great location to live. You're by the waterfront. It's got transit infrastructure. It's near the airport. It's got all the right dimensions to make it a great location over time.
And go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think it's, I think that area has tremendous opportunity. What's changed, though, in the last sort of 6 months to a year is there isn't really, modest or low-cost alternatives available anymore. So new construction there costs the same as new construction in Cambridge. So it's from a pricing standpoint, I don't think people make that move anymore for price. And I think the types of companies, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Twitters, their first choice is to be in Kendall Square and to be close to academia and close to the hub.
No, and I think from my perspective, I agree. I think the Longfellow Bridge is, the second or third worst bridge in Boston nowadays, with everyone moving into Seaport. We consistently hear negative feedback on getting in and out of there, especially getting back to the CBD. And I think the lower price alternative space is probably, potentially the CBD and the low-rise space. I think that's an urban location that some of these tech companies that don't want to pay a big new construction pricing can go and get an aggressive deal. And I think you'll see more and more of that over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Jerry, what's the labor look like in Cambridge? Obviously, major growth in the market, major incoming companies aggressively trying to hire the labor pool. Do you see that drying up? Do you see that affecting Novartis' growth?
No, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, whether it's at Novartis, Aveo, Acceleron. There's never been a lack of talent in all the years that I've worked there. Finding people has never been a challenge. I remember kind of the slower periods at Biogen. The bigger challenge was when you're recruiting, some of the senior positions in Biogen and starting to build up things. You'd have a bigger challenge bringing people in from other parts of the country, just with the sticker shock of housing and things like that. But I remember early in the days where even way before considering Weston, you do the studies where people want to be, and you can do studies like that. It's always going to come out whatever way you want, because there's just as many people in the suburbs that don't want to come into the city. So it's always a trade-off. Even you're going to get people from Sanofi, Genzyme that will switch just to be closer to their house and where they are. So I don't see the labor being an issue at all, at least that I haven't. Even for me in the planning and construction side of things, there's talent out there. It's just a block away.
Is there 10 years ago, the suburban Cambridge workforce was Route 2 oriented? Is that still the case, or are you seeing it more diverse?
From the South Shore, so I didn't know any of that existed.
Right. So your workforce is pretty diverse in where they live?
It's probably more commercial.
Yeah.
That's what I see anyway. It's like, obviously the seaport to me, to be able to take the boat from the South Shore would be ideal. But I think it's more, starting to go out more towards Metro West, even farther. I grew up in Central Mass, and the fact that folks that I work with live out in Central Mass amazes me. I consider that so far out there. But I think just with housing prices and things like that, it's kind of pushed it farther away, which will put more strain on the Route 2s and things like that coming into the city.
Steve, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on, when we look at the slides and the growth in the residential market. Obviously, there's a lot more people to complain about research buildings in their backyard and related issues to that. Have you seen that affect your approval process?
Well, I think, everyone is struggling with, first of all, recognizing the anchor in Kendall and its growth and the generation of economics and jobs is driven off of the innovation model, which, again, a lot of this is lab space. There is a challenge. The labs have made, noise. They're large. They have big mechanical systems, and trying to balance that with the housing is a challenge. We're trying to figure out more and more about how to make them quieter, more energy efficient, and how do we get the housing in closer. We want this mixed use, but there is a tension there. And I think everyone on our design teams and our development teams, and same with folks on the podium here today, are struggling with how that works. So we're committed, and I think others are, to try to create a more mixed use environment. We want to make sure that we do that without it being at the expense of the innovation anchor. If it comes at the expense of that, then I think we have failed. So we've got to try to figure out, again, how to keep the golden goose there without, and still get the benefits of some of these mixed-use urbanization issues.
Right. I remember, 15 years ago, there was specific residents by name, because they would go out and take a very active role. So it seems like that's gone down, but just the number of sheer residents is probably up there.
I think, Cambridge is a small city. It's 100,000 people. It's only 6 square miles. Kendall Square itself is about a square mile. And it is a tight-knit community, and I think the city is appropriately concerned about quality of life and making sure that this all works. They want the economic growth. They want the innovation to occur here. I think everyone in the city is proud of the activity that occurs in Cambridge, but it is a balancing act. And I think these are tough issues, and very serious people are sitting around the table trying to figure out what the right, the optimum solution is for these things. We're going to get the right quality of life and still have the innovation occur in Cambridge.
Rob, you've got fresh battle scars in this topic, so I'd love to get your perspective.
They're healing a little bit. I think to Steve's point, the city has done a pretty interesting job of not only thinking about creating that balance, but incentivizing property owners and developers in different locations. So East Cambridge planning study years ago took the area over 5 King Site Gallery and Leachmere, and essentially created an opportunity where you could double the density through a PUD as long as the sort of the second piece of that was all residential. So you could go from a 1 to a 2 FAR, and the second piece of that needed to be residential. The same discussion is going on in Central Square about height and density, and with Steve's initiatives around Kendall Square, the same thing is going on, and Boston Properties is now moving forward with a residential project within Cambridge Center. So these are all ways for people to recognize that the world has evolved, the needs of people have evolved, and the development that started in what was essentially a big industrial park or a big area. It's actually the Kennedy Space Center at one point, and a lot of that land had been bulldozed. And these things have filled in, and in some cases filled in a way that's created something that isn't today what people want. And the city has found a good way to plan around that and to bring that area to life. So some of what you talked about earlier, this urbanism impact, has been facilitated really by good planning in Cambridge. And I think there are a lot of smart people that have aided in that process.
Yeah, I think actually that the office lab and residential can coexist fine if they're planned right. And also in terms of even the sites, office labs want big floor plates if they don't really benefit by having a lot of height. So those work well on those big sites, and apartment buildings can go up on little tiny sites. If they go tall, they're much better because people want to use in their small floor plates. So if you look at the whole macro picture, they can fit together well, and the puzzle there still allows you to go close enough to have everything there. So I think the last thing you want to do is just have all of one flavor, and then, because in the end, the lab guys want places to live and work and go to the restaurants, and the people who live there want to be able to walk to work. So it's a win-win for both.
I think that balance is important, and I think the city and the developers in the neighborhoods are all having that discussion. We know we're not going to put laboratory buildings out in the neighborhood, so they're going to be where they're, in the core. And the question is, can we bring some residential into the core, as Alex has talked about, on the right sites, so we're not using up the innovation sites. We'll try to get that balance achieved that way.
And Alex, in your experience, what's the development approval process like compared to other submarkets that you're active in?
I'd say, well, even within Cambridge, it varies a lot. I mean, despite your problems in East Cambridge, it's probably one of the easiest locations in Cambridge versus Central Square, just because Kendall Square is a pretty large area with the residents pretty far from the core, and you are out there on the edge, so it has a bigger impact. But it's really one really strong residential neighborhood there, whereas in Central Square, you're in the middle of 4 different neighborhoods, and they have different opinions, and they've been there for a long time, and so it's a much more complex location. Harvard Square, it's, there's not much development going on, so I can't really speak to that one.
And I can say that in the development of the courthouse, the one thing that was clear from the beginning was that the laboratory wasn't going to work there for obvious reasons. The height of the building, the size of the floor plates, and the adjacency to the neighborhood. The debate over office or residential there is actually more complicated. I would say, in spite of maybe what you read, the majority of people in the neighborhood really prefer office over residential there because of the demand on parking that a residential project like that creates. If you don't, even if you build it on site, a resident can get a sticker and park in the street. So there's a lot of nuances and complexity to that relationship different developments to the neighborhoods that they are adjacent to. And it's really what's interesting, I think, about Cambridge, and sometimes it's long and a little bit torturous, but I think in the end, these projects actually get it right because of the process. I think the process bears out some good, some good planning with the give and take between neighborhoods and the planning board and the city and the developer and the property owners. And so I think it evolves in a pretty
meaningful and productive.
Yeah, it really is.
Before we get to questions, I just don't want to slight AOI West Cambridge, which we haven't really talked much about, and I'm just hoping to get maybe Rob's perspective on it, because you spent the better part of probably over 20 years over there. Where you see the role for AOI in the future, and then maybe just real quickly, Alex, you can touch on what's driving the residential demand. I think there's been more development in AOI residential than any of us would have necessarily expected a few years ago.
So I think LA for as long as I've been working in this market has always been a traffic issue, and I think there's an argument out there that sort of water seeks its own level, and that people people can find their way through that area, and when they stop being able to get through there, they'll go around it, and you can have some continued growth. I think the residential boom there now is probably more productive than looking at a lot more commercial boom out there, because I think the residential can slightly complement on the traffic side the patterns of people coming and going, and particularly in an area like Cambridge Park Drive, which is a cul-de-sac. The residential development on that versus commercial development probably makes a lot of sense. And it also, I think, is helping to create more of a place out there. I think, a big coup for that area was George Colony and Forrester making the decision to build headquarters at Discovery Park. And I think that, the education building is really the only brand new office space in the last 13, 14 years in Cambridge. So that's a big coup for that area. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the space that has been sold by Pfizer there, and what the future of laboratory is out there. That market is a lab market, was really a wide and then Pfizer market, and so it's been a little bit hard to know whether people that are moving out there would skip over it to go out to Lexington, Waltham, and other places. So I think that's still to be tested at this point.
I think from a residential standpoint, it's within Cambridge, it's a lower cost alternative, not that much lower, but somewhat lower. And also, the fact that you're building at lower density and height, you're building stick framed open shop that you're really not going to be able to do in the prime locations of Kendall Central or Harvard if you could find anything. I think long-term, the dilemma, unfortunately, is just the spaghetti of roads and tracks that divide it into sort of big chunks. And so you don't have that red line landing in the middle of an old main street and then grows down into the neighborhood. That, unless you mow down a lot of highways, it'd be pretty hard to change that. So it's always going to suffer from that, but just the more it fills in on all those parts, the better it's going to become for those people who live and work there.
Some people have argued for putting back the rotary there. People remember the rotary. Or say that it actually worked better when you had a rotary there and they created that intersection.
Great, thank you. With that, I'd like to open up to the floor for questions.
I want to ask you a little bit about the issue of startup companies. Is Cambridge, especially East Cambridge, pricing itself out of the opportunity? And those are a lot of the growth companies that you really want to encourage. I know there has been some new development, a requirement to put in some percentage of space for startups, but where do you see as far as the future and the ability to be able to keep these companies there in Cambridge as opposed to pushing them out?
I can try on that one. I think that's a dynamic that we face every cycle too. Real estate is a cyclical industry, and we are sort of coming, up the cycle now. And you see that pressure again. It happened back in 2000, and you do see some entrepreneurs pushing out. I think what we've done in the last decade is try to develop different models that allow entrepreneurs to leverage off of centrally used activities like conferences and computers. And you see that at Cambridge Innovation Center. And we recently did a transaction with an affiliate called Lab Central to try to get laboratory users to share facilities. hopefully getting the cost down, both, from a perspective of not having to make a long-term commitment to the infrastructure, and the pricing for fully loaded services allows entrepreneurs to participate in that environment. So we see more of that activity happening. In our zoning in Kendall, we actually committed to additional space being created, both in Kendall Square, in Kendall Square proper, in our zoning district, and in the surrounding area, to try to help more of that space being created in the area.
And I think from our perspective on the brokerage side, it's definitely a trend. I think that companies typically incubate in Cambridge, whether under 5,000 square feet, they'll be at at the Innovation Center, and then when they get to be that 10,000 square foot range, they want to look at Seaport, they want to look at Charlestown, they want to look at financial district. And we, as a firm, actually have taken our Cambridge group and our Boston group and put them together as the urban group, just because we need our real estate professionals to have a perspective on the different submarkets, because the tenants will look across the river, and it definitely is. I think one of the Cambridge could be a victim of its own success in those early stage companies.
Yeah, I'd say also, I would say having been a tenant in Cambridge Innovation Center for a decade, and to see how that place has grown and matured, it's taken over, you probably know, at least half the building.
Right.
And I think that there's more and more people get jammed into different spaces, but there's everything from private to large offices. It's an incredibly robust location for people, and people will pay whatever they can to be there because it's got so much going on. And again, the key anchor is it's MIT. You have MIT professors hiring their students, students hiring professors. That is what is going to keep mushrooming in that location. And if it eventually, MIT obviously owns that building, so maybe they're helping them out, but it's working well.
I think Tim Rose is going to bring you into negotiations renewal.
I think to that point, Steve, we saw when I was with the band, was that on the submarket, the VCs want to come to Cambridge now. They want to be there because they feel like they need to be the first ones, to catch the latest.
And the embassies and the consulates, they're now in Cambridge, the same building. Swiss embassy, the British embassy, they want to be where the action is and where the brain trusts are. And that's pretty unusual. You never would have thought they would have come over to Kendall Square.
And I totally agree with that. I think the VCs and the consulates are willing to pay the premium that startups aren't. So that's where they go to Seaport and grow. Other questions?
I'm wondering what you guys think about transportation problems that might be coming up. I know there was that study last year that I think you noted that the Red Line was already at capacity for South Station. And I know when I go home, I look at the image area, and I can almost every day I can walk as fast from Mass Ave to Broadway than bus roads. Getting too bad already. At what point is that going to be great, or what's going to happen to improve the transportation?
It's a great question. The question is for the audience is, what potential effect is the lack of capacity in public transportation going to have on the growth in Cambridge moving forward? And I know, Steve, you're near and dear to this discussion, so maybe we can...
Yeah, my building actually sits on top of the Kendall T-stop, so I see it every day. But I think there's a couple of things. Clearly, we need to make more investments in our infrastructure, and I think obviously that's a broad responsibility of the Commonwealth and the municipalities. And it's probably too big of an ordeal to take on by any individual developer or any particular community. But I think there's an easy solution to some of that, which is let's just slide the peak hours a little bit. The infrastructure has a certain capacity, and that's at 8:45 Monday through Friday. It is crowded on the T, but you can start moving people around a little bit. I think Green Line extension, shuttle buses, other things happening tying to North Station. There's been other growth and other sort of pseudo infrastructure being built around it to address it. I think residential's helped, more bikes coming in. All those things are responses to this along the way. But if ultimately Massachusetts wants to continue to grow, we're going to have to think about how we continue to further that infrastructure.
And Jerry, from the user's perspective, how active is that dialogue within Novartis about frustration with the public transportation and road traffic?
I think it's definitely a topic of concern. I think doing things with shuttle buses, we have a flexible work schedule. Those are things I think have definitely changed, throughout my career in life sciences. That the flexible hours. I mean, we have people coming in all different times, staying late, coming early, things like that. And again, it kind of goes to having more restaurants and things like that in the area. It's easier to be flexible because it's not like all of a sudden 5 o'clock everything shuts down. I mean, that's definitely a big change. I know Vigem, I'm not sure where it is today, but Vigem, as far as, they have a larger shuttle bus that actually goes out to some of the communities, that they run themselves. So I think...
There's also an interesting study done, I think it was by the ULI and some other group, maybe the Lincoln Institute, probably 5 years ago. And what they were showing is that economics of driving way out of Boston now, although you buy your house a lot cheaper, the cost of getting there now parallels being downtown. So that's driving more people to downtown as well. And therefore, probably the most important place the state to put their money is in their transit infrastructure. Not just the red line, but the entire system. If you think about it, they built it. If they get to rebuild the space, worth trillions of dollars. To not put more money into that is, a problem we have in the whole U.S., but it's so critical. We've already got the lines there, the tunnels are there, change the systems. There are ways to increase capacity. And even at the peak hour projections for full build-out of Cambridge, they're still, if you compare them to other cities in the world and this country, it's not that big a negative impact, but you want it to be as positive an experience as possible to keep people using the system.
And I actually think the Uber and some of the technology that's come along now, that UberX, which I'm not necessarily ready to embrace, but some people use it, really is that idea of even having Uber technology on a shuttle bus, so that if you're working at an office space and you know exactly where the bus is, so you know exactly when you need to shut off the computer and exactly when you need to walk downstairs, makes the shuttle bus experience much more pleasant and certainly a much more effective way to get in and out of work. In the back of the room?
Hi, can you talk a little bit about the boom in the lab market last year? A lot of it was driven by new companies taking a lot of space. This year there's some negative news with a lot of those companies, and whether that lab boom has the potential to become a bit of a bust.
I would say that, for every bad news, we've gotten some good news to balance it out. And I would say the bad news isn't as bad as the stock reaction. In a lot of cases, if you look at area pharmaceuticals, the heads been to the FDA, and the stock got absolutely hammered, and then the stock's recovered. And area fine, and area probably will get acquired, and we'll get a credit pharmaceutical company that will come in. They have the same situation. I mean, these companies that take large blocks of space are viable companies. We haven't really seen those companies go out. Alnylam is, stock news that went from probably 18 a year ago to I think at 96. And so stock reactions make for good press and get in the paper. From our experience, when you talk about Biogen, it continues to grow, and some of these large companies, Novartis continues to grow, 100,000 square feet on average every year. That's not great news. It's not exciting. People don't pick up the paper to read that. So I am, while we do have some challenges with Vertex space coming back online over the next couple of years, and some blocks of space that are coming online, I definitely wouldn't characterize the future as a potential bust. It's going to be bad news and good news. That's just sort of the nature of that industry.
Yes, Steve, I'd add to that is that I think that's been the history of Cambridge. Go back and look, try to find Polaroid, look for digital, look for, simplex wire cable, go look, the entire history of Cambridge has been about evolution and innovation. So I think we're going to see that happen. That is part of the dynamic. These companies, some are going to succeed and grow, some are going to shrink, they're going to morph, they're going to be bought out. And I think we've accepted that as the dynamic in there. That's part of the bad that comes along the good. And I think you just need to build a model that respects it and embraces it along the way, and try to build space that's flexible enough to accommodate the next generation of users that come into Cambridge.
Yeah, and I just add that we've never, historically, in this very cyclical Cambridge market, we've never seen such extraordinary anchors of credit as we see today. So when you see the Broad Institute with philanthropy money and their investment, Novartis, Millennium, many others on the life science side, and then Google, Microsoft, Amazon. It's a relatively small market. The office market in total is only 10 million square feet. In Kendall Square, that's roughly 7. The Class A space is about 6 of that. And so there's 6 million square feet, and right now, the creditworthiness of the tenants in that space is at an all-time high. So the strength of this from a security standpoint and as an investment is far different than, say, 2000 during the dot-com boom, when you had companies like Thinking Machines, and these were great companies that were innovated by great folks that came out of MIT and other places, but they when the bottom fell out, these companies lost all their value and in many cases gave up their space. I think we've got to cycle down, but I think the down is going to look a lot different next time.
We have time for one more question.
With the last 10 or 20 years that you guys have been talking about, we've had the same, as Cambridge, we're talking about mainly, but in Boston, we've had Menino at the helm. The last 8 years, we've had Governor Patrick. There's a lot of new faces in government, and I just was curious how you might be affected by that, kind of wondering what impacts the new faces may have. If there's any way you can plan around that.
So the question is the change with Menino and potentially with Patrick going to have impacts on the boom that we've seen. Going to Steve here, because you're in the hot seat.
You just described democracy, which I think we're going to have going forward. I expect, we've had some long-term players in here. Certainly in Boston, Menino has been actively involved and engaged in developing the agenda, and I think he's done a marvelous job in Boston. But I think those dynamics will continue. This is a great metropolitan area. You've got a lot of wise people that are involved in the governance of our state and municipalities. But there are real issues out there, so we are going to struggle over them, and we're struggling over, frankly. These are things that are important. We're going to want the economy to grow. There's probably everyone in this room probably knows somebody who's looking for a job these days, and so it is a struggle, and it's worse elsewhere. So we want to continue to grow and be strong. We're going to need our public officials to get engaged in the agenda to help us, and there will be trade-offs as we all go through and accomplish our agenda. So I'm hopeful for the future, but transitions are inevitable.
And I would add that I feel like the Massachusetts as a state stands alone. And so companies that come to town, they might consider Boston or Cambridge or Waltham or Burlington, but in often cases they've made the decision to come to Cambridge. And you think about Vertex, Vertex moved from Cambridge to Boston. Well, that was a win for Boston and a loss for Cambridge. And so I think the local officials are more important than the state officials. With Shire and Lexington, they really stepped up with pretty good TIF financing for Shire, to establish a pretty big campus there. And so the individual municipalities are the ones that are really playing a larger role. And so, with the change in City Hall in Boston, we've got that effect, but probably, right? I mean, it's probably, Mayor Menino was very focused on Seapoint. Is that where Mayor Walsh is really focused? I think time will tell. It's a good question. With that, I'd like to conclude and thank everyone for coming.